Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of the Infinity series and founder of Engine Books. Let's see what we have today. All right, very special episode of the Write Project podcast here today. I know I say that they are all special, but this one really is. Returning to the Write Project podcast is JRH Lawless, the author of the author of the General Buzz series, which started last year with Always Greener. It was also featured in a few From the Rock anthologies, such as Pulp Science Fiction From the Rock, and continued with the Rudai Rebellion recently. It's wonderful, fun science fiction. So much so that it was recognized. It was nominated for a Hugo Best Book long list and also an Astonishing Books Award kind of thing.
Astounding Award.
Yeah, Astounding
we can get
Award.
Into the name later. There's some really cool etymology there, by the way. But
the Astounding Award. All right, I'm going to keep in that I messed that up because that's even funnier. It's always funnier when I mess up. Thank you for joining us on the Write Project podcast, JRH. Jay.
Thank you for having me as ever, Jay. Yeah, it's way easier to say.
Yeah, way easier to say. Yep. Perfect. Tell me about this new book. I loved Always Greener. I have not had a chance yet to pick up Rudai Rebellion. I'm a bad person, but it's on my want list right now. Tell me about, because you sold them both together. They were published the same year. Tell me about how this one differs. Where does it go next?
Yeah, well, Rudai is especially close to my heart. First of all, just if only because of the title, because basically I had the great pleasure of ripping off a really great phrase from Shakespeare.
Yep.
Because the Rudai Rebellion is from King John. It's, Shakespeare has a bajillion amazing turns of phrase, doesn't he? But this is one that, unlike so many others, hasn't yet become part of everyday language. And so I was really happy to be able to rip that off and give it a little bit of visibility as the title there. Plus, it really fits. So it's a continuation. When we say the Rudai of Rebellion, it's a continuation of what happened, without spoiling too much, in Always Greener, which is based around society changes linked to new technology, like a lot of good science fiction is. In this case, the entertainment factor around these lenses that let people all around the world tune in to see these contestants' realities through their eyes 24/7, to see who the biggest loser of the 2070s is, as the core sort of game show mechanic of the first book. This carries on a couple of years later, still the game show, still the setup, but all of that, all of the sort of social repercussions, both on the social level, but also the repercussions for the main character and his tolerance and acceptance of his part in this machine or not, really comes to a boil. Nice. Hence the rebellion side of things, without spoiling too much.
Excellent. That's what you want. You want the next evolution of the concept. Kind of, not to compare it to Hunger Games, it's not the same thing, but really the Hunger Games aspect, the titular Hunger Games, only take place in their completion in the first one. After that, it's rebellion, it's society and stuff like that. Getting more into the world and all that kind of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. Looking forward to that. I'm loving the idea. I loved in the first one the idea of the Biggest Loser competition, and the reality TV aspects of it and stuff like that. Being an X-Men fan, being a very weird comic book nerd, I could not help but be reminded of Mojo World. Have you ever experienced this? Do you know what Mojo World is?
I know of it. I don't know as much as I wish I knew, but I do know of it. Yes,
it's a bizarre concept. The X-Men in the 80s. I love Chris Claremont. I do. But when I read through his run, because I read it all, I was like, cocaine had to be a factor. Like, I'm not saying anything bad about Chris, but like someone was like, oh yes, they're being persecuted, and it's wonderful. It's like good heartfelt storytelling, and then it's like, and then they go into space, and then a giant obese TV executive captures them and brings them to another dimension and makes them perform on reality TV. And I was like, what?
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
What does this have to do with persecution, Chris?
It is persecution in a way to defend the perhaps indefensible, but to think that society, and to see where we are headed as society and the role, just going back to that first little etymology quip at the beginning of Always Greener, the fact that religion and entertainment, from an etymology word construction point of view, mean the exact same thing. Yeah. That all this has a major role in terms of social control, sort of opium of the people. In Rudai Rebellion, there are lots of Marxist, structuralist ideas that are more or less explicitly developed in terms of analysis of what's going on through certain characters. Because at the end of the day, that's beyond the, again, the whole entertainment side of things, the reality TV, the, finding the worst jobs and the worst lives, and effectively, also having a lot of humor, dark humor based around all of that, hopefully. It's also about a fundamental message about where we are as societies, where we're most likely headed, and what our options are to find an alternative in terms of political organization in particular. And it's a real plea, which already appears very clearly in the Rudai Rebellion, and even more so in the third book in the series, which I'm finalizing right now, for a direct democratic alternative.
Okay. It's interesting the way you got, like, bringing up the religion and entertainment etymology, having the same root, for lack of a better word.
Yep. Good word.
Yeah. Given I couldn't pronounce the real word. Yeah. For a second there. There's a lot of that in Victor Hugo. I don't know if you've ever read the original Hunchback of Notre Dame. Yeah. Yeah, love it. But it's very much, people kind of forget. I don't know if you remember this or if you picked up on this at the time, and I picked up on it and looked in to see if I was right. But there's a big theme of it's an anti-literature book, like in that it argues against the written word in some ways, but not in a specific way. Victor Hugo was a big fan of architecture. Like, he was a big fan of the architecture of the church, of Notre Dame Cathedral. And to him, it's like, if religion's the first form of entertainment, let's say communication instead of entertainment, the architecture of the church communicates stuff. And he was worried that the written word and people being literate would subsume the communication form of architecture. And it did.
No, you're absolutely right. And in fact, you're so right that in French culture, particularly of that time, but even still today, in a large degree, in very elite circles, les bâtisseurs de cathédrales is cathedral builders. It's almost like a shorthand for it's hard to define really, but this whole movement, like you're saying, of it almost isn't really religious in nature. It's a way of I'm getting into perhaps deep waters here, but way of sort of social control again, and communication, I suppose, is the easiest, like you said, it's probably the easiest way of saying it. And it's really interesting. It still has that major repercussion even today. Yeah.
And in some level, I mean, like, books are still around, obviously. Hopefully they don't go anywhere for people like you and I, but the evolution of communication has continued to the point where, like, I can understand why religion and entertainment had the same root word, because, like, if it goes religion into religious architecture into written word into radio, and we all know TV killed the radio star, into reality TV, into internet, like, it's a part of the same cycle.
And podcasts are obviously the worst of all, right?
Oh, obviously. Horrible podcasts. Yeah. 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 Who needs to read a book when you can just listen to Jay explain the themes of the book? I'll just mark this read on Goodreads right now. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Being compared to Victor Hugo isn't the worst thing in the world, I imagine, though.
I think a few of us would take that.
Yeah. There are negatives too. Like in some ways, it's like if you read up on Victor Hugo, we're way off topic here, but it was very interesting. Like it's like he when he got a grant or like he got paid to write the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then didn't like for quite a very long time, which I can empathize with a lot. Like just didn't, and the publisher was like, "Hey, where's the book?" kind of thing, and then he was caught trying to sell the book. He ran out of money, so he got caught trying to sell the rights to the book to someone else, like that he still hadn't written.
I love
and
that.
The first publisher was like, "Hey now, hey now."
That's what I didn't know. But it's a bit like Douglas Adams says, that deadlines are great, especially the whooshing sound they make as they go past.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I love the idea of just being like, oh no, I've gotten an advance and now I'm out of money. I know, I'll sell the same book to someone else.
Yeah. Rights law was not what it is today. That's for sure.
Yeah. Lovely. Oh my. So you mentioned there's a third book in the general buzz, and you've mentioned before in a previous interview that like all of your writing tends to take place in the same universe, at least thus far. You know what I mean?
Totally.
We even found a way to
100%.
link. Yeah, like, is there more after that? Do you think is the general buzz or like? And a lot of writers, like some readers, get turned off by very long series. So I know a lot of writers that write like a trilogy and then another trilogy that's technically set in the same world, but
6 books planned in general buzz.
Well, all right then.
6 books planned. So third one, I'm in hopefully final edits after a really great edit letter. Fourth one is about half draft, and the other 2 are plotted. So yeah.
Interesting. Like it.
Yeah. And I'll give you a scoop right now. There's a bit of a naming scheme going on in that. So there's the A in Always Greener, there's the R in Rudai, there's a G which is prominent in the title of the third book, which isn't announced yet, so I don't think I can announce it. So basically it's 6 also, not just because it fits the arc I want to tell, but also because I'm going to basically spell out Argyle, which is the last name of the main character, as part of the titles of the 6 books. That's you heard it here first, folks.
All right, I like it. I do like that. I like that a lot. I wasn't sure if you were going AR. I was wondering what the last 3 would be. I wasn't sure if you're doing ARG as in alternate reality game.
I'm gonna have to find a Y. There's that as well, which I love, by the way. But I'm a big ARC fan. But Y. So I'm gonna have to find. I've got a good one for the Y, but it was the hardest of the bunch to work into the title.
Yep. There's a few letters that are like, why do you exist, letter? I am to this day, people will get mad at me, but I'm like, why is the letter C a thing?
Yeah, C is a fun one. I mean, Y is great because it's originally the Greek I.
Yes.
That's what's literally called in French. You have the I, and then you have the Greek I.
That sounds like I'm bad for when things way off topic, when things fit a certain pattern of syllables. So like my brain creates rhymes but like Greek I, my brain just goes Greek I, the science guy.
Of course, obviously.
Greek I, the science guy. No,
yeah, it's like Archimedes or something.
Yeah. Now we're comparing me to weird stuff. Absolutely.
It's all good.
No. So Rudai Rebellion is about now, and when's the third book due out? Do we know?
Don't have a date yet. I'm hoping, depending on how fast I can finish these edits, how fast they can get confirmed with the publisher. I'm hoping this year.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, that's one of the advantages of working with a smaller press, as you well know, is that, you can perhaps be a bit faster than the larger presses would be able to turn things around. So
yeah, absolutely.
One of the many advantages, should I say?
Yeah. Jay, how long were you a part-time writer before you became a full-time writer?
That's it's a bit of a misnomer in a way. Part-time writer. I'm not a full-time writer right now. I still have,
I don't think anyone is.
a
Maybe
job I
just
need to do.
maybe
There's not
correct
that
that.
many. That being said, I think perhaps the real question is sort of, when do you consider yourself fully a writer as opposed to like being like an aspiring writer or something? And
Fair.
that's a term which should not exist. As soon as you are putting words down onto the paper or onto the Word document, or whatever you use, to Scrivener, you are a writer. If you are writing things and get paid a couple of cents per word for them, or anything for that matter, you are a professional writer.
Yep.
So at that point, you can't have these labels that limit your own perception of the value of what you do. You don't need that validation. You're doing the job. You're doing the job.
Yeah. I see that a lot in the industry. I see a lot lately, and just in the circles I travel in, I've been seeing a lot of pedanticness, meanness, whatever you want to say, over the word bestseller.
Yeah,
is the thing lately. Like there are there's a certain crop of writers here locally who are very upset that some other writers have that title, bestseller, because they don't and won't. And it becomes like, well, they're not a real bestseller because they only went bestseller on Amazon. I'm like, well, okay, but you only went bestseller on Atlantic Books Today, and I hate to tell you, yeah, most people don't read that. Like, yeah.
I mean, if you get the banner, obviously you're a bestseller. I mean, by definition, because that's what the banner. Even if you don't get the banner, for that matter, because that's a silly system anyway on Amazon. You're number one bestseller in a category. It is what it is. I mean, if on the cover you had time to say number one bestseller in this category of the thing on this website, sure, but you don't. So you are a bestseller in the story. It means as much as you want it to mean. It's
and if we're only counting, like, to these people locally that kind of say this in my scene that like are snobbish about it, I kind of say, like, if you're only counting New York Times bestsellers, then none of us are. And,
that's it, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Wonderful. Thank you, Jay. Jay, if you didn't write, what would you do for work if it's your day job, or for art if it's not your day job?
Well, it's no secret that I am also a lawyer by trade, a very jack of all trades lawyer, hence Space Lawyer SF, my Twitter handle, non-subtle plug. Please drop me a line. So yeah, being a lawyer feeds into my work a lot, to the point that Lawless is both a pen name and a bit of a joke in itself, because I'm a lawyer.
Of the law.
My name is Lawless.
Yep.
Yeah, so I would carry on doing that for starters.
Yep.
But if I weren't allowed to write somehow, I don't know, I'd be spending a lot more time on MMOs, I suppose, or you mentioned ARGs. I'd probably be doing a hell of a lot more deep diving into those than I already do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Jay, do you think someone can be a writer if they don't feel emotions strongly?
Yes, I think they can, as long as they have the ability to make readers feel emotions strongly, which I could see somebody who, actually perhaps it might even be easier for somebody who has that kind of a distance and a bit of a neuroatypical outside look on emotional relationships and so on, and they themselves, could have all sorts of personal situation, but perhaps that might even help convey emotions in an even stronger way for the readers. So yeah, no, I think they absolutely could.
Damn, I never thought about that before. That is valid. Like so far outside it that you're like, okay, let's manipulate the system. Like,
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And you can do things differently.
Yeah, that is a good answer. I like that. That's cool. Jay, do you think having a big ego helps writers, or do you think it's harmful to a career as a writer? as someone with a massive
you know,
ego. No joke.
yeah, obviously. So as a very qualified person to answer this question, um, it can definitely be harmful in that it can be harmful in the process. If your ego, especially as a writer, that will involve the conviction that everything that you write is gold, that can massively harm the process. It can certainly harm if you're effectively, as a consequence of that, an asshole. Relationship with the whole rest of the team that is required for a thing to ever hit a bookshelf, digital or physical. You can't. It's not an industry where you can, or certainly where you should be able to prosper if you have such an ego that effectively you're an asshole. Even though I'm sure it happens. So I saw something. Was it just on Twitter? I don't know the fundamentals of the story, but just somebody who was paid. Was it 500,000 advance to write a nonfiction piece, or was it maybe literary fiction? I don't remember. And editorial differences meant that they ended up, then reselling the rights, breaking with that publisher and reselling somebody else. You're paid that much in ads. You can make an effort, what I'm saying, to not have editorial differences.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. That's I think editorial differences is one of those code words. Like, you know what I mean? Like when celebrities get divorced and it's like what's it like irreconcilable differences. It's like kind of like I used to work in a newspaper. This is grim. But I used to work in a newspaper, and I hate seeing suddenly passed in the night in an obituary, because that's code for that's a polite way of saying they took their own life, kind of thing. Which, if you know that, it's a dead giveaway, at which point it ceases to be a code. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Dead. Sorry.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know that. So
yeah. That's burdensome information. Honestly, that's one of those.
It's interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jay, would you ever consider? This is a funny question for you. Did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym?
I considered it really hard and long, to the point that I have been doing so for a few years now.
Yes. You have a day job as a lawyer who we will not name, and as much as there's nothing mutually exclusive about those two things, they are sometimes you want to keep them separate.
Yeah, that was it. We just wanted to keep things separate. So it was a discussion I was having with my agent actually very early on in our relationship, and my first books were coming out, and it was time to consider that. And so I basically workshopped the name JRH Lawless with her. So
yeah, cool name.
It goes to Marisa.
Yeah, I like it. Jay, in your opinion or in your experience, what's the best way to market your books?
That's a really wide question. I've spoken on a few panels at a few conventions. I've taken a good few hours of content there already, and that was the only scratching the surface.
Finish this episode.
Best way to market. Have a really good team on your side, for starters. I'm talking about traditional press, be it with small presses or larger presses. The single best thing you can have is obviously having a marketing team and publicist on your side. Barring that, things you can do on your own, which is another whole kettle of fish. Writing community as a whole is full of a lot of great people who are very willing to do what they can to give back and to to lend a hand. So, for instance, some of the best stuff I saw, which helped Always Greener and Rudai Rebellion reach that bestseller status that you mentioned earlier, if only, and it's already allowed on Amazon.
Yep.
Was reaching out to folks that I just know through SIFWA, science fiction writers of America, even though that's another thing we can talk about. It's also open to everybody. I'm head of the international committee, chair of the international committee at SIFWA.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's relatively recent, but yeah. So I'm very happy to talk about anything related to that as well. But through that, people that I knew, like John knew of, and had spoken to, like John Scalzi, Mary Robinette Kowal, they have who was then president of SIFWA at the time, they have blogs, they have platforms that they regularly open up to folks like us, like any writer, who wants to gain that visibility through these different articles they do. So for John Scalzi, it's the big idea behind the story. For Mary Robinette Kowal, it's my favorite bit of a book. So they have these different themes and different takes on things, but it gets your book and your links out and your cover out to loads of people. I mean, having a part of the great teams, also having great cover artists who can do something that is by far the single most direct link between any reader and the book, which is the cover.
Yep.
So yeah,
that makes sense. Okay, love it. Yeah, and the most direct form, but also the first bit of marketing anyone sees. Like, no matter what, whether they're just stumbling on it in the bookstore, seeing it scroll past on Amazon, or if they're seeing a paid ad on television that you've done up, it still involves the cover,
Always.
Yep.
It's the single most important thing.
Yep. Jay, what are important magazines or podcasts or different media? I'll include writers' federations in this for writers to be a part of, subscribe to.
Well, obviously, on top of the most important one, which is the Write Project. There are great writers groups, both. For us, the Atlantic provinces and throughout Canada, sort of at the provincial level. They can be very very useful resources, depending different genres what you write. For science fiction, fantasy, and horror, SIFWA does a fantastic job for all its members all around the world. As I mentioned, possibly months ago for you folks, a different question, or maybe even in the future. But then, podcasts. There's some amazing resources. I'm trying to remember the one I need to catch up on. Writing Excuses. I need to catch up on that. I've missed a few weeks. That's pure gold. There's so much up, both in terms of craft. That's one whole side of things, but then also in terms of industry. I could then also recommend something that also is very linked to SIFWA. Writer Beware, where they do some very important public service, I would say, in terms of communication, generalization of things that people would know through the grapevine or whatever, but actually make it accessible, because the writing industry is global, more so than ever, and so that needs to be, that community needs to be. And then just basically, yes, Twitter. In my genre, different genres might be more based on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but for us, the science fiction fantasy writers community on Twitter is a really, really huge support in terms of sharing of information, of ideas, of motivation, of anything you can want. Is it's really a good thing to be part of. And that can be, for me, that started with some other fantastic events, which particularly like Pitch Wars, which is actually where I created my Twitter account, my first ever personal or writer account, to be able to participate in Pitch Wars, which is an annual event, which isn't about winning it and eventually, going to this agent phase, because I have agents who work with them for different books that are then polished with experienced writers and mentors, but just integrating the community, getting access to all these people so willing to share tons of practical information. Really, really valuable.
Interesting. Okay. I like it. Thank you. Yeah.
You're
wonderful. Wonderful. Well, everyone check that out now. Check out Always Greener if you haven't already. Check out the Rudai Rebellion right now. Check out his...
They're on shelves at your Indigo chapters pretty much everywhere, by the way.
Lovely. Awesome. Very accessible. Also on Amazon. Also everywhere.
Yes, that's right. And all other awesome places books are sold. I'm not sort of, touting anybody specifically. Sorry.
No. Go right ahead. Perfect. I am going to do... Thank you for joining us, Jay.
Thank you again for having me.